If there was a self-storage soapbox and I was standing on it talking, what you would have heard over the past few years from me is get a feasibility report. Let's talk about feasibility reports. My name's Mark Helm, and I'm the author of Creating Wealth Through Self-Storage, and I'm the creator of the Self-Storage Quick Start Academy. And what I do is I support the small investor who wants to get in the self-storage business or who wants to grow their self-storage business, strategically do so in a way that creates true wealth and a fulfilling career. I have all types of support for you at creatingwealththroughselfstorage.com. So let's talk about feasibility reports. Probably the first and most important thing to know is that we're lucky to be in the self-storage industry. No other industry has feasibility reports that can be so accurate. I mean, just think about it for a minute. Think about a retail center, or think about an office building, and you've hired somebody to determine, how feasible it is there demand for an office building or a retail center. Well, how will you know the market area? Well, typically the market area is a part of the county or part of the city, maybe the whole city. People will drive across a city to work. People will drive across a city to shop. In the storage business, nobody's going to drive across the city to rent from you because they think your doors look nice. People rent storage where they live and where they work. So it's much easier to identify and quantify what is your market area and how many people are there. That's the first piece of a feasibility report. A feasibility report is ultimately designed to give you the supply-demand for a particular facility or a particular location for a facility. And the first piece of that is to get the supply. How you get the supply is how many people are there in your market area that could potentially be your customers. Again, we're lucky with self-storage. Easy to identify how many people are there. The next piece of a feasibility report is what is the current supply? How much is already there of existing self-storage space? Again, not that hard to quantify. Somebody doing a feasibility report can literally drive by and look at and to some degree measure the number of facilities that are located within the market area once you identify that market area. Then the third piece is, you know how many people, you know how much is already there. You need to know what the average person in a particular submarket, how many we use square feet of self-storage per capita. Now, I've made it sound real easy, but not all feasibility reports are equal. What makes a good feasibility report is you can break it down into one word, and that's data. The more data you have, the better the feasibility report. Here's a simple example. How was your market area determined? Well, most people will create a market area using 1, 3, and 5 mile radiuses. That's valid. That's a valid way to do it, and in many cases it's correct. But not all cases. What about drive time? We are located in a border town. Like our city is on a river, and across on the other side of the river is another state. That river is functioning literally like a wall in many cases. When we did our feasibility report for our downtown urban self-storage facility, if I'd used a 1, 3, and 5 mile radius, that would have been totally wrong. Because nobody's going to cross that toll bridge who lives 1.5 miles away to rent a unit from us. Always check to see how the person doing your feasibility report determined what the market area was for the project. Here's an example from a feasibility report that we had done for a project in Florida. Ultimately, we did use the 1, 3, and 5 mile rings on this one, but I wanted to make sure that that was the right and valid way to determine the market size. Also, look closely at the assumptions that the person creating the feasibility report did. For example, did that person assume that any of the competing self-storage facilities located within your market area that have room for expansion have expanded? Or did they just use the current square footage? Because if it's easy for a competitor to expand, my coaching is assume they're going to expand. Now, many people doing a feasibility don't actually take the time to figure out if there's expansion and how much. Now, one thing I always check on is I want to make sure that the person doing the feasibility report did not just use national statistics, that they really drilled down into that market and at least attempted to determine what the benchmark numbers are for that state and particularly that market. The amount of square feet per capita in Houston, Texas is very different than the amount of square feet per capita in Minneapolis. Two different numbers. Another thing to look at is what was their demand methodology? How did they actually determine how much demand there was? Here's an example from the same report of the person doing this report literally used 3 methods of determining demand and then weighted one and came up with a number on potential demand by looking at all 3 ways of calculating it. Take a look at this. She looked at, this was done by Amanda Helfrich, who's my go-to person for all things feasibility. She looked at a square feet of storage per person. Many people just stop there. This is where she drilled down into how many square feet per person and why here's the data and how she came up with the numbers she used. Then she used demand method number 2, square feet per household. Then demand method 3 was a capture ratio analysis. And from all of those, she came up with her demand conclusions. It looked like, in her opinion, in the current 3-mile radius, there was an unmet demand of about 60,000 net rentable square feet, and in a 4-mile radius, 230,000 square feet. And it looks like in the future, projecting out a few years, she sees that number coming down. Now, that's a very detailed report. There's no question that some thought and research went into that report. Now, we may question a few of the assumptions, but all in all, that's the type of data that you want to be making a multi-million-dollar decision on. One thing to remember is that this is not an exact science. It's an art as well as a science. But you want to get the absolute best report you can get. Don't cheap out. Don't get the simplest, easiest desktop report you can get. Yes, you may do your feasibility report in phases where you start with a demand analysis, and if it looks good, move on. But you definitely want the person doing the feasibility report to go to the project, go to the market area, travel and look at the competition, go down and look and see who's pulled building permits. Don't cheap out on this. I'm shocked at how many people do their best to avoid spending money on this and buy the cheapest reports they can get. And believe me, I've seen some pretty not good feasibility reports. Also, keep in mind that some banks, particularly if you're getting an SBA loan, they're going to want to see a pro forma in the feasibility report itself from the person completing the feasibility report. Not all banks require this, but just know up front so that you can be sure to have that included in the scope of work as you're hiring the person doing your feasibility report. So at the end of the day, if you're bringing new space on, get a good feasibility report. I hope this began to show you that there's feasibility reports and there's feasibility reports. Get a good one. I'm constantly asked, who do I recommend? Well, if you go to creatingwealththroughselfstorage.com, there's a resource page. All of the vendors that we use in the self-storage business are on that resource page, including who we use for our feasibility reports. One of them, Amanda Helfrich, is the person creating the report you just looked at. This episode is being recorded in February 2019. In early April 2019, Amanda is going to be at my booth at the Inside Self Storage Convention. If you'd like to talk more one-on-one with her, feel free to come to our booth and connect with her. Also, there will be a host of other people at the ISS convention that do feasibility reports. She's definitely not the only one that does a good job. A lot of people do a good job. Hopefully, this episode has helped you know what makes a good feasibility report from one that's not so good. So thank you very much. My name's Mark Helm. I'm the author of Creating Wealth Through Self-Storage, and I've created the Storage World Analyzer to support you in being able to do the pro formas, being able to project the cash flows in the future. It doesn't matter whether you're buying existing, doing an expansion, building from ground up, you can fairly accurately determine what are the cash flows, and you can make different assumptions. Ultimately, this tool tells us what we can offer for a particular project, and we'll run it a number of different ways. If you're not using it, I invite you to look at it. It's easy to use, and particularly if you don't know yourself as someone who's good with Excel, this could be a real important tool for you. So I look forward to being with you next week, and I'll see you then.